In her last days, Julie Andrews, who was once lauded for her elegance and golden voice, is by herself. Notoriety loses some of its luster as one reaches the age of 89. A story of profound loss, difficult decisions, and unseen struggles lies beneath the surface of the charm. She was acknowledged for her talent. However, a new form of isolation set hold once she left Hollywood. The things and people she cared about faded away with the passage of time. How did she end up where she is now after all these years? Come explore the tragic truth of the once-adored mythology with us. Julie Andrews began her acting career at a young age before the fall. She began performing in local revues with the support of her stepfather and mother, who were both performers. She had a distinct voice even back then. It made an unusual noise for a child, one that was both powerful and crystal clear. As word got out, she became a celebrity. She was efficient. She put in a lot of time, took more classes, and steadily improved. She performed her music live on stage, radio, and at concerts. She managed to keep up with the seemingly endless stream of events. The first major break Julie had was when she was a teenager. As a member of the British royal family, she was chosen to perform in a Royal Command performance. That was the spark that ignited her. Beyond that, she turned away. She transitioned to musical theater and began to play more prominent parts. She started at the bottom and worked her way up by joining touring shows. Her work ethic kept her around, but her voice let her stand out. She never missed a performance, memorized her lines, practiced diligently, and sunk her teeth into her roles. Jules was more than simply a singer. Also, she had acting chops. In every part she played, she injected charisma and character. What she did was more than that. Many in the audience felt an emotional connection to her. The directors began to see that her abilities extended beyond her natural talent. She exuded confidence. Not long after, she landed the main role in the West End musical The Boyfriend. She went straight to New York's Broadway after landing that part. Despite her youth, she showed no signs of fear. She dove headfirst into her newfound adventure. Julie shot to fame after arriving in America. She was cast in a significant part in My Fair Lady, an episode of the show that became very popular. Night after night, she wowed audiences as Eliza Doolittle. She maintained a steady pace, always delivering powerful performances, even if the part was taxing. Up the ladder she went. She maintained her concentration and kept pushing herself. She went on to star among other famous actors in Camelot, where she played a pivotal role. She felt at home on stage. Theater was where she became famous. She quickly gained a reputation as one of the most talented young artists. Still, she never wavered in her commitment to her art. No matter how successful she became, she was always honing her voice. She protected it by exercising every day and avoiding anything that could hurt it. Her foray into filmmaking followed. Walt Disney saw her potential and gave her the role that would alter the course of her life. One of her career-defining events came when she decided to play Mary Poppins. It was a smashing success. Julie was able to showcase her acting, singing, dancing, and bringing a fantastical figure to life in this role. Her career took a leap forward. She went on to become famous all around the globe. Her breakout performance in the musical The Sound of Music came shortly thereafter. It went on to become one of the all-time beloved musicals. Viewers from every corner of the globe were captivated by her mesmerizing singing as she moved across the hills. She got famous for the part. She proved she could carry an entire film as well as a single. After that, she kept performing live whenever she could and acted in more films. She was very protective of her voice, which she considered her most precious asset. She appeared in a wide variety of film and TV roles throughout the 70s and 80s. Huge audiences were attracted to certain initiatives. She kept going even while others gave up. In her roles, she experimented with many styles and took chances, and maintained her involvement in the field. People who had followed her since her stage debut continued to be a part of her lifelong fan base. To prove her worth, she attempted to accomplish new things. She continued to develop, gain knowledge, and discover new directions to go. However, Julie began to encounter fresh difficulties in the 1990s. After decades of support, her voice finally gave out. Something seemed off to her. The chords she formerly effortlessly nailed were now out of her reach. Singing and speaking got more challenging. She paid attention to it. She sought medical attention, made an effort to understand what was happening, and diligently adhered to all recommendations. She had no idea that something monumental was about to happen in her life. A devastating loss befalls Julie. The phenomenal singing voice of Julie Andrews had touched the hearts of millions. It was heartfelt and elevated her performances in every position she took on. She gave life to Mary Poppins, Victor Victoria, and the music with a voice that spanned 4 octaves. It wasn't only her range. Her voice encircled every syllable, soaring above the music and conveying emotion with every note. However, the wear and tear on her voice from years of performance became apparent. She had a difficult part in the Broadway production of Victor Victoria by the mid-1990s. Every night for nearly 2 years, she gave a performance, repeating vocal exercises until she started to notice that something was wrong. Something began to get in the way of her voice, and it stopped flowing as smoothly as before. After seeing a doctor, she learned that her vocal cords were affected by a lesion. The term cyst was later used by Andrews to characterize the soft but harmful growth that had been mislabeled as a polyp or nodule. She had an opportunity to relax and recharge her voice when her Broadway run concluded, but she felt pressured to keep performing. She was invited to take a tour of the play by the production crew, which included her husband Blake Edwards. Hard work and devotion were hallmarks of Julie's character. She was afraid of disappointing others. Therefore, she consented when the doctor informed her that surgery could safely resolve the issue. So long as she got well soon, she thought she could go back on stage in no time. At New York's Mount Sinai Hospital, she underwent surgery in June 1997. To produce audible sound, the human voice is powered by the vibration of two neck cords. Cords wear out quickly for singers, particularly those who perform for a long time. Cysts, nodules, or polyps, small growths, can develop in such a situation. These often aren't malignant, but they can still be a major pain. Forceps or lasers were common methods for removing them in the 1990s. It was not always safe to use these procedures on sensitive tissues. Scarring could happen. That is regrettably the case with Julie. Things didn't work out during the operation. Scarring altered the range of motion of her voice cords. Neither their flexibility nor their vibrancy were the same as previously. She lost the ability to control her voice as a result. Her once clear and rich singing voice has transformed into a harsh rasp. She sounded very different. Regrettably, it was unable to reverse the harm. Afterwards, her spouse recounted the events. He went into detail about how devastating the loss was for her professional and personal life. Her whole existence had been molded by music. From the time she was a little girl, performing was an integral part of who she was. Something crucial had been lost when her voice had been silenced. Work and financial stability weren't the only issues. She had carried a talent for decades, and now she was losing it. It seemed as though a piece of her had been severed. It was 1999 that Julie made the decision to go to court. The doctors and hospital were the targets of her lawsuit. According to her, nobody ever told her the surgery might be risky. She may have avoided potential problems by taking a different route if she had been aware of them. According to the lawsuit, there was absolutely no necessity to run the business. Prior to proceeding with such a drastic measure, her medical team ought to have explored alternative possibilities. After the operation, she thought her singing career was over. Her attorneys also elaborated on how the injury had altered the course of her career and silenced her voice. For the majority of her life, she had performed music. A door had been shut on that aspect of her future. Andrews went on to say that going without something crucial to her daily life was excruciating. The loss of her singing voice was a devastating blow to her self-esteem. In 2000, the matter was resolved. Julie continued to feel the after-effects of the surgery, but the specifics of the arrangement were kept secret. She may have found other forms of entertainment later on, such as acting and writing, but her career as a singer had come to an end. Everything changed for good. Despite losing something fundamental to who she was, she had to figure out how to go on. Gradually, she adapted to the shift. The setback did not deter her entirely. Those who had been following her career for a while, though, could tell the difference. At one point, her voice had enlivened movie theaters and screens. Only recordings and recollections remain of it now. The solution that had seemed like a good idea at first had a devastating impact on her life. The legendary Julie Andrews confronted the tragedy with poise and strength. However, the effects of that operation followed her throughout her life, coming to a close and a fresh start. In an effort to regain her voice following her 1997 surgery, Julie Andrews started vocal exercises. It was difficult for her to quit up. Steven Zeitels was her new surgeon, and she underwent more procedures with him over the following many years. With great care, he worked on her throat, easing the scar tissue that had formed there. Additionally, he made an effort to loosen up her remaining vocal cords by stretching them. These endeavors resulted in a shift. The harm was severe, yet her voice improved and became more powerful. After carefully examining her, Dr. Zeitels saw that the previous operation had removed a significant portion of her vocal cords. Her singing voice could not be revived because there was insufficient. A lot of stuff had been cut out. Regrowth of the tissue was impossible. Her remaining voice range was approximately 1 octave. While she had some control over lower notes, the middle range, the sweet spot for most songs, was completely out of her reach. Even her high notes were shaking. It was impossible for her to sing like before. Andrews persisted in holding on to hope despite this. She began to focus on scientific matters. Recent medical studies pertaining to the voice box piqued her curiosity. To fund the development of new treatments, she made a generous donation. A vocal cord conference, where experts in the field could network and exchange ideas, was something she worked to organize. She went so far as to become the Voice Health Institute's honorary chair. It was clear what she wanted. She would back any initiative that could result in advancement. An innovative gel was one of the potential remedies being investigated. Injecting this gel into the voice cords may temporarily increase their pliability. It wasn't a panacea, but it may provide some relief. The pace of research like this is still somewhat slow. Years pass throughout trials. Just like everyone else, Andrews had to wait. There was still no solution that could bring her voice back. It was difficult for her to accept this shift. She had never lived a moment without singing. Even as a tiny kid, she had begun. Stepping onto the stage, experiencing the euphoric power of music, performing for an audience, collaborating with an orchestra, harmonizing her voice with a beautiful melody. More than everything else, this had been her favorite thing. Time was necessary for her to process the loss of that joy. She visited an Arizona clinic in 1999. She came in to get some help with her grief. With the immense anguish she was experiencing, she needed assistance. Concurrently, she took a seat for an interview. In order to express her emotions, some parts of her, she said, were still in denial because she wasn't ready to confront the whole reality just yet. She was devastated to have lost the ability to articulate her innermost thoughts and feelings. Something significant had been severed from her life, she felt. Despite her diminished singing abilities, she gradually discovered strategies to persevere. Her return to singing in 2004's The Princess Diaries sequel, Royal Engagement, shocked many. Her narrow vocal range was accommodated by composing a song just for her. Compared to her previous tremendous singing, this was subpar, yet it had significance nonetheless. It proved that she could still bravely participate in a musical, despite its unconventional nature. Andrews started to come to terms with what had transpired as time went on. When she was younger, she thought her voice was the most important thing. Her professional life, sense of self, and inner world were all molded by this instrument. She realized there was more to herself than her music as she confronted her loss head-on. She was nevertheless valuable in other ways. She then got to her feet. She continued acting, discovered new passion in writing, and didn't stop working. Writing books expanded her audience even further. She could still reach out and communicate her emotions through her stories. In this new direction, she felt at peace. Even though she was no longer performing live, she discovered new ways to move her fans. Andrews saw changes 50 years after her portrayal of Maria in the musical The Sound of Music. Life had dealt a blow, but it had also brought a blessing. Her life shifted to focus on acting, writing, and research support. She gracefully and completely embraced each of these jobs. No, she didn't isolate herself. With what little she could still offer, she persisted in pushing ahead. Even though the anguish of losing her singing voice never really went away, she managed to create something fresh out of the rubble. Other abilities gave her strength. By sharing her experience, she offered hope to those who were also dealing with vocal issues. Her influence remained unchanged, even though she had a different voice. She maintained an active presence, participated consistently, and developed innovative means of self-expression. Even if life knocked Julie Andrews down, she refused to stop. Despite the fact that it may have required a detour, she got to her feet and continued on her way. In order to go forward, she clung to the parts of herself that were functional. The fact that one can suffer a significant loss was ultimately demonstrated by her, and still construct an aesthetically pleasing structure from the remnants. Nevertheless, went above and beyond the call of duty at a pivotal point in her life to do something truly remarkable, surprising, and delighting many. For her work in the 1996 Broadway production of Victor Victoria, Julie Andrews was nominated for 3 Tony Awards. Even though it should have been cause for celebration, the situation swiftly became considerably more serious, and it turned out to be her final Tony praise. Only Julie out of everyone on the show got a nomination. She was singled out while the rest of the cast and crew, including her husband Blake Edwards, who served as both director and co-writer, were omitted. All throughout the globe, people were talking about the news. The film version from 1982 served as the basis for the musical, which featured Julie Andrews. Previously, the plot of that picture had been adapted from a 1933 German film. There were deeper aspects to the story, but it was also humorous. It chronicled a Parisian singer's plight as she sought employment. Her out-gay pal had a daring plan. She worked as a drag performer while pretending to be a male rather than a woman. She wowed the crowds, and the act ended up being a huge hit. The Pink Panthers' Henry Mancini composed the score, and Goldfinger's Leslie Burkuss wrote the lyrics for that film. Thanks to its stylish presentation, endearing characters, and Julie's outstanding performance, it gained popularity rapidly. She and her husband took the musical to Broadway several years later. In 1995, the musical version made its debut. The audience was really impressed by Julie's performance. The Tony Award, which had eluded her thus far, appeared to be within her grasp. Nevertheless, Julie noticed something she couldn't overlook when the nominations were revealed. The whole production crew, including her co-stars, had gone unrecognized. This decision had hurt her deeply, and she just couldn't get over it. After the matinee performance on May 8th, she rose to her feet to a standing ovation from the audience. She took advantage of the applause and cheers to make her voice heard. What to do, she said, had been on her mind for quite some time. She felt awkward accepting the nomination, even though she was flattered to be even considered. Starring alongside her were Tony Roberts, Michael Nouri, Rachel York, and Greg Jabara, all of whom she noted. Blake Edwards was also mentioned as her spouse. Their time and energy had gone into the program. The listeners were moved to tears by her remarks. The applause grew even more intense. Their goal was to comprehend her intentions. There was more at play than her own self-interest. Standing up for the disregarded was something she felt compelled to do. The Tony Awards announced that her name will remain on the ballot, notwithstanding her rejection of the nomination. The scenario had already altered its tone, but it meant she still had a chance to win the award. It was widely assumed that the prize would have been automatically bestowed upon her. She was incredibly dedicated to the part, and her reputation brought a lot of people to the theater. But giving up the opportunity to win made life tough for everyone. The decision was particularly difficult for her to make because her husband's career had been a driving force behind the creation of the Victor Victoria Initiative. This musical was Blake Edwards' chance for a new beginning in the theater industry. He was already a successful film director. The stage adaptation, which he wrote and directed, was a labor of love for him. Julie clearly felt the sorrow of seeing him excluded, and she made no effort to conceal her devotion to him. In addition, Julie said she would remain on the show until it was profitable. Her level of dedication was demonstrated by it. Her husband had worked very hard, and she didn't want his efforts to be for nothing. On the other hand, her performance during the live broadcast on June 2nd was anticipated by those in charge of the Tony Awards. Even while they were aware that her presence would draw in viewers, concerns regarding her ability to perform on the show arose after Victor Victoria was not nominated for Best Musical. The snub had made things much worse. The broadcast event typically only featured performances by acts that had received nominations for the most prestigious musical awards. Everything changed when Victor Victoria was omitted from that list. Not only that, but the musicals that were ultimately chosen were Rent and the highly anticipated Bring in Da Noise, Bring in Da Funk. Big and Victor Victoria were not the recipients of the last two seats, which were also considered. Those spots were instead allocated to two shows, Chronicle of a Death Foretold and Swinging on a Star, that had previously ended months prior. Julie Andrews remained strong throughout. Those who saw her in Mary Poppins recalled how she portrayed a positive figure who could also step up when necessary. It appeared like she was now bringing that same enthusiasm into her everyday life. She did what was right, and not only for herself, but also for those she cared about. She would not accept an award when others were disregarded. Her choice was memorable. The significance of recognizing talent and the power of a person's platform to uplift others were both pondered by many. Despite losing the Tony, Julie Andrews made something valuable out of a bad situation. A personal honor became a daring act of justice and loyalty on her part. She showed bravery and commitment by standing by her spouse and team while avoiding the limelight. Character, rather than accolades, was the focus of her decision, which had an impact beyond the realm of theater. In order to grasp the elements that shaped her principles, let's examine her journey to becoming the person she is today. Early childhood challenges. A little village in Surrey, England called Walton-on-Thames was the site of Julia Elizabeth Wells's birth on October 1st, 1935. Her mother, Barbara Ward Wells, was a teacher who primarily taught woodworking and metalworking. She had spent her childhood in Chertsey and later with Edward Charles, Ted Wells. Although they tied the knot in 1932, there were more complications than meets the eye. It was via her mother's affair with a family friend that Julia was born into this world, not as Edward Wells's daughter. After much waiting, Julia's mother finally told her the truth in 1950. No one on earth was aware of it. Until, many years later, she decided to write about it in her book. The breaking of the family's unity coincided with the outbreak of World War II. In the end, her parents decided to part ways and get a divorce. Their second marriage was solemnized shortly thereafter. In 1943, Barbara tied the knot with Ted Andrews. Also in 1944, Edward Wells wed again, this time to Winifred Maud Birkhead, a widow who had been a hairdresser at a factory throughout the war. In Hinchley Wood, Surrey, she and Edward were both employed there. A lot of Edward's time was devoted assisting with the relocation of children from London to the countryside, where they may be safer during the ongoing bombing raids. As the war dragged on, Barbara and her new husband became active in a group that provided entertainment to soldiers in an effort to raise their spirits. During this period, Julia spent some time in Surrey with her dad and little brother, John. She moved home with her mom and stepdad in 1940 after her father thought it was in her best interest. He had faith that they would encourage her artistic development. Mom thought it was about time Julia began referring to her stepfather as Pop instead of Uncle Ted, the name she had always used. This concept didn't sit well with Julia. Despite her discomfort with her stepfather's new title, she persisted in addressing her biological father as Dad or Daddy. Those were challenging years to live in London. They resided in an impoverished section of town and didn't have much money. The conflict exacerbated every problem. This was a really low point in Julia's life. She went on to describe how difficult it was for them to get by and how impoverished they were. Even at home, things weren't safe. Her stepfather was a drunk who lost control of himself frequently. He attempted to enter Julia's room while intoxicated on 2 consecutive instances. The only way for her to keep him out was to lock her door. Because of this, she never felt safe again, even in her own house. Nevertheless, her mother and stepfather's income increased as their stage careers progressed. They initially relocated to Beckenham, leaving their gritty London area behind. Hersham was her mother's hometown, so they returned there after the war ended. They made their home in a mansion on West Grove known as the Old Mews. For the family, the house was filled with history. Julia's grandma was a maid there once. The house may have been torn down in the end, but it was nonetheless a turning point for Julia. Her stepfather, who was financially secure, started covering her training expenses. She began her artistic education at the prestigious Cone Ripman School. Madame Lillian Stiles Allen, a former concert soprano and now a voice instructor, was her mentor later in life. These classes provided her with the foundation she needed to develop her singing voice and become a more confident performer. Madame Stiles Allen had unwavering faith in Julia's abilities and guided her in mastering vocal technique. The fact that Julia's voice wasn't quite up to par with her teacher's expectations for classical music didn't stop her from diligently following her training. During that period, her voice was thin and extremely high, capable of reaching a range of 4 octaves, as she recalled. She made a joke about how far dogs could hear it because of how sharp it was. She continued her education even after graduating from the Cone Ripman School. She persisted in attending a conventional Beckenham school known as Woodbrook School. For both her normal schoolwork and her art classes, this was a godsend. Effort, change, and the encouragement of people who saw potential in her impacted her life throughout this time. The path ahead was fraught with personal obstacles, yet she persisted nevertheless. Julia had a tough childhood. Her home life was quite chaotic, and she had to cope with secrets, separation, and all. But she found her way with the support of some important people and her own tenacity. She became the person she is today as a result of every action, every lesson, and every terrible memory. She persevered through the many challenges she faced in those early years. It seemed more like she made something amazing out of what life had given her.